Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. Today is July the 3rd, 2026, and of course, we're just a few days since the United States Supreme Court upheld the birthright citizenship uh, and struck down the executive order by President Trump trying to end birthright citizenship for certain people. Um, However, the president since said that he was going to ramp up the denaturalization of naturalized citizens. Now, remember, under our uh, laws, again, that's from the 14th Amendment as well, the citizenship clause, there's no two-tier citizenship. So, naturalized citizens and birthright citizens, that's natural born citizens, are both equal, right? They're both equal. It doesn't matter that only natural born citizens can become US presidents. So that's the only thing. Not everybody wants to be the US president, but that doesn't diminish the stature of the naturalized citizen. Now, many people are scared. I've noticed that there have been people talking about this on social media, and it's been on the news about the president's intent to have the Department of Justice ramp up denaturalization cases at about 100 to 200 cases a month, right? So that's roughly 1,200 cases to 2,400 cases a year, right? Um, that's still a trickle, right? A drop in the bucket, considering about 800,000 people are naturalized, become naturalized citizens a year, right? So in 2024, over 810,000 people, or far more than that, were naturalized, right? So um, that's still a trickle. That's like, and there are 26 million naturalized citizens in the US right now, right? So that's like 0.0000000, right? Percent likelihood. So that's not a it's not a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%. So that's negligible. It's inconsequential, right? Unless you're the person. So typically, denaturalization cases are brought on about, on average, 10 cases a year, 10 to 11 cases a year. Again, that's compared to the number of people who get naturalized a year. That over 800,000 people get naturalized a year. So that's so insignificant, right? But again, there's a standard, there's a legitimate reason to pursue naturalization for people who committed material fraud, right, in the application process. So today, what I want to do is give an example of the sort of, people, the rare cases and the sort of people who have been successfully denaturalized. The case of Valerian Trifa, who was Archbishop of the Romanian. Uh, the Romanian Orthodox Episcopate, or Romanian Orthodox Church in Detroit, Michigan. So I'm going to tell his story, but also remember the process still requires, it's the Department of Justice, right, that pursues the case, right? So the citizen being denaturalized still has the right to defend themselves in courts. It's a very costly trial process, and the burden of proof is very high, significantly high, and it's on the government. The government has to prove through clear, unequivocal, and convincing evidence that the naturalized person committed fraud, right? Fraud in the application process, and it was material. Again, it can't be trivial. So the burden of proof is on them, and the judge decides. The other person has a right to defend themselves. In the case of Valerian Trifa, he actually had, he was a high-profile person, right? He was a significant figure. He was the Archbishop of like I said, the Romanian Orthodox Church in the Michigan area. He was a spiritual leader of about 35,000 to 40,000 people, right, in the U.S. So, and I'll tell his story in just a moment, but he the process took a very long time, right? From 1975 to the 1980s. Eventually, he gave it up, right? He gave it up because he said he didn't want it to drag on. The government had clear and convincing evidence, and I'm going to just discuss what it is. And so, but by that time, he had spent over $100,000 in legal fees, right? So it's very, very expensive. It will cost you if you choose to defend yourself. But the other thing is, if the government fails, right, to provide the substantial evidence it needs to meet its burden of proof, that's clear, unequivocal, and convincing evidence, proof. If they fail, then they can face legal action, right? The officers, the agents involved, the officers, the prosecutors, the federal agents, they can face what's called a Bivens claim. So they can, because the citizen rights, if he prevails, the citizen can now institute a claim of violation of his citizenship, his citizen, and his liberty interest rights, and he can file a claim of malicious prosecution, a bad faith claim. And so I could do a video later on and talk about the actions that can be brought against the special agents. So it's the officers. So the United States has what's called sovereign immunity from torts. So the United States government itself cannot be sued on a constitution, on a civil action, on a tort, right? But the officers, the agents, right, who pursued that action can be prosecuted. They can be sued, and there's a claim against them called a Bivens action, a Bivens claim. And the other thing is the citizen who prevailed is able to recover his attorney fees and the cost of the litigation. So the government returns that money, and so there are other things as well, malicious prosecution, and a bunch of other things. So the government typically has to be very sure. So you can see historically it's been 10 cases a year that it's pursued. 10 cases a year, 10 to 11 cases a year. That's very low. But the government has been naturalizing over 800,000 people a year. So it's not something that the government really pursues. So even when President Trump says that, well, he's going to ramp it up to 100 to 200 cases a month, right? That's roughly still under 3,000 cases a month. And the government is still naturalizing over 800,000 new citizens, right, a year. That's really, really low. That's a trickle. It's not substantial. But in any event, let me discuss the story of Valerian Trifa, right? So Valerian Trifa, it turns out, he became naturalized in 1957. He was from Romania. He came to the U.S. in 1950, and he became naturalized in 1957. And during his time in the United States, he became a priest, and he rose rapidly through the ranks, and became Archbishop, right? A very powerful figure, Archbishop of the Romanian Orthodox Episcopate or Romanian Orthodox Church in the Michigan area. However, at some point, someone in his congregation, in the Romanian community, thought they recognized him, that he had been he had been a member of, so the Romanian equivalent of the Nazi party. They were called the Iron Guard, right? They were an anti-Semitic, fascist organization. So again, the Romanian equivalent of the Nazi party. They were pro-Nazis. And they had been involved in inciting pogroms and the murder of Jews. And This person recognized Trifa as the propagandist, right? The Joseph Goebbels, right? If anybody remembers, Dr. Joseph Goebbels was actually the chief propagandist of the Nazi Party of Nazi Germany. And after Hitler committed suicide, he briefly took over. He was as Führer, as the leader, right? He briefly took over until he and his family also committed suicide. So Valeria, this guy Trifa, was so this Romanian person, uh, members of his congregation, the Romanian community in America, they claimed that, well, this guy is not really who he says he is. He was actually a pro-Nazi guy, and he was the chief propagandist of the Iron Guard, a fascist party organization that incited the murder of Jews, and they were very violently anti-Semitic, and they committed pogroms, and that he wrote newspaper articles and gave speeches. In particular, he gave a speech on January 20, 1941, that led to the murder of almost 300 Jews in Romania. So so they reported this to the Department of Justice, right? So he denied it. So the DOJ contacted him. He was a high-profile figure. He denied it. He said he wasn't the same person, and that was somebody else. So, however, the DOJ started investigating, but it took a lot, right? It took a lot because the DOJ just doesn't stop. It's the Department of Justice that will pursue the denaturalization case. They have to investigate it first of all. They just don't follow any anonymous tip, right? People get tips all the time, and again, because they have a high burden of proof, right? And they're limited resources. They can't pursue every case. So unless it's very they're solid grounds. Now, what happened? The pressure. There was political pressure, right? There was political pressure that instigated the Department of Justice to then start denaturalization process in 1975. So for about 20 years, there was pressure, especially from a Romanian dentist who was a Jewish man, right? His name was Dr. Charles Kremer, right? And his family had been killed by the Iron Guard in Romania. So for 20 years, there were protests all over the nation. In New York, there were mass protests. So Jewish communities, the members, the Anti-Defamation League, they're very powerful, different organizations. They started to put a lot of pressure, leading mass protests, organizing, right? Writing the Department of Justice, putting tremendous pressure, right? In fact, I watched a documentary on it, and I could see the mass protests, right? Demonstrations calling for his prosecution, right, as a war criminal, right? Because, by the way, so when you're going through your naturalization, there you go through a citizenship test, and it takes a long time. Before you get your green card, you do that. You take a test. You go through an interview, as in you're answering questions. They're asking you all these numerous questions and tests. Amongst them, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Have you been a member of a fascist organization? Have you ever committed a war crime? Have you ever done anything? Have you ever incited the persecution of anybody? So it turns out Valeria, right, answered no to all of these things, right? He misrepresented, so he lied. In fact, what the representations he made to the U.S. government during his immigration process was that he had been a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. He had been a prisoner of the Nazis. He claimed to have been persecuted by the Nazis, and so in fact, the way he was able to immigrate was through the Displaced Persons Act of 1948, right, which was created to help members of people who had been persecuted during the by the Nazis and fascist groups in Europe. So that was how he actually got to immigrate to America. So It turns out he was one of the people who was actually persecuting Jewish people. He had been a member of the Iron Guard, again a pro-Nazi group, and and after with later investigations, when the Department of Justice eventually took up the case, they would, through collaboration with the German government, they would find an old postcard of that had been signed in the name, the identity that they were claiming. The accusers of Valerian were claiming that was his true identity. So they tested for fingerprinting. They did they first tested for did a handwriting analysis. They saw the handwriting match, but he denied it, right? But they now, through advanced technology, they used laser technology. They discovered a postcard, right, that somebody with his name, right, with the name, he no longer bore that name, but they found a postcard in, that he had posted in Nazi Germany, right, and through laser technology, they were able to extract the fingerprints, and they matched it with the fingerprints that he had used for his immigration, that was on his certificate of naturalization, and they saw it matched. He was the same guy. He had not actually been a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. He had actually been a guest of the Nazis. He was protected by the Gestapo and the Nazis. He was an ally. So they found that, okay, he had lied. So that was how they started the denaturalization process, right, for him. So it took a lot. Initially, he fought it, so it cost him a lot of money. So the Department of Justice, the Office of Special Investigations, they started the denaturalization process against him in 1975. By 1982, he gave it up, right? He decided to, he said he didn't want to let it drag on, but he entered an agreement. He agreed, he admitted that he was actually the person that he had lied, which is material, right? That's material because he got his immigration, he was able to get his green card, his permanent stay, through the Displaced Persons Act of 1948 for people who were persecuted, right, by fascist groups like Nazis. They were victims of persecution in Europe. Meanwhile, he was not a victim of persecution. He was actually one of the perpetrators of, he incited and perpetrated persecution. He was actually a war criminal. It turned out he was a war criminal. So he admitted that he lied, and he agreed to give up his citizenship. And so instead of going to trial, because again, to denaturalize, you have to go to trial. It's a long process. A lot would have been revealed. And so he gave up. He said no, that he would give it up. And he asked to be, he asked to be deported to, where he wanted to go to was Switzerland. But eventually he ended up living in exile in Portugal as a war criminal. That was where he died. So it took a long time. It took 32 years because he became a naturalized citizen in 1957. And 1957, and it was when did he? Sorry, he came to America in 1950. He came to America in 1950. So it took 32 years. So it was 1982 thereabouts that I think eventually was deported in 84. But because it took time, he had to get a place where they would take him. He didn't want to go to Romania because he would face prosecution or death or whatever. So at the same, they don't want to just dump you off somewhere. But eventually he was removed. He agreed to leave himself, and he gave up his U.S. citizenship. So those are the rare. So you see, those are very extreme cases, right? And when you're going through the naturalization process, they ask you all those questions. They want to know your identity. So you see, he gave a false identity, and he had been a war criminal, right? He was a pro-Nazi war criminal that had incited the persecution of Jewish people. He was actually directly responsible for the persecution of almost 300 Jews. But somehow he had masked his identity, and he became an American citizen, right? He was respectable. He was an archbishop, not just a regular priest. He became an archbishop, leading almost 40,000 adherents, right, in America. So those are the high profile cases again, so it's not something typically that government agents want to even take up, because there's a case, once you become a citizen, right, it's your entitlement. So there's an issue of a malicious prosecution or a constitutional rights violation of your citizenship, right? So there's that issue. But in this case, they did the investigations. It took a long time, so they were investigating, and they had clear and convincing evidence from the fingerprints, right? And eventually he admitted himself. He ended up admitting himself before it went to trial. So he didn't want to go to trial because the government would have probably exposed other war crimes that he committed. All right, so that's it. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.